Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and today we're going to take a little bit of a break from holiday paintings and we're going to do a warm glowing sunset. Before we get started, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and then check out the video description below for a full list of materials. Now let's get started. So today the first thing I'm going to do, as you notice my canvas is backwards on my easel, I'm going to wet down the back. It's going to absorb a little bit through the front of the canvas so that I can have a little bit of extra working time blending. So I have this brush that I kind of reserve for wetting my canvas. I don't know if you can tell how frayed out and kind of knotted and tangled this brush is. So I'm going to take my brush and wet it in my jar. And then I'm going to start by just kind of scrubbing. See how I'm scrubbing it into the canvas? If you just brush it on, it will kind of repel it and it'll bead up on the canvas. So just scrub it a bit so that it gets down into the fibers. Because this will also tighten up your canvas, you want to make sure that you get it up underneath the frame. If you don't get it up underneath the frame, then in the corners here you'll get this puckering on the front of the canvas. Okay, now my canvas is nice and tight. So to start, I'm going to take my 1-inch flat brush, wet it in my jar, and wipe it on the edge a bit. Now I have some Diox purple and cadmium orange, and I'm going to get a mixture of them and just lean a little bit closer on the cadmium orange side so I get a little bit of this kind of a ruby red color. So I'm just going to start up here and light brush strokes back and forth. Remember, with paint management, you want to make sure that all of the canvas is covered before you move on. Let's pick up a little bit more paint that's a bit more transparent than I want. There we go. And if you're getting brush stroke lines like I am, then just light pressure afterwards, and that will help get rid of them. And see, I'm doing a very loose mixture, so sometimes I get little streaks of the orange, sometimes I get more purple. But because that moisture is absorbing through the front of the canvas, I can keep working on these colors a bit longer. I can go back and reblend them or change the colors completely. Now as I move down, I'm going to pick up less purple and more of my orange. Start just below where you left off, and then light pressure right up into the previous color and back down. And that's how you get a nice smooth blend. While you're painting, if you feel like the front is starting to dry and you're having a harder time getting a blend, just get a spray bottle and mist down the back again. Okay, now right here, I'm going to pick up some orange and a little bit of yellow, not a ton of yellow. Right about where I want the sun, I'm going to start making it brighter. But because there's still purple on my brush, if I just put a little heavier pressure, I get some of that purple mixture in there. Now I've decided that I have a little bit too much orange going on in here. I feel like I want to see a little bit more of that purple. So I'm going to grab a bit of the purple and I can just come right in here and blend that straight in. Heavy pressure to lay it down, light pressure to dust it together. Now for the ground area, I'm just gonna pick up the rest of my purple and a little bit of a mixture of all of them. Just get kind of a neutralized color. So it still matches the sky, but it's not gonna get lost in the sky. I'm kind of going sideways there. The vast majority of this ground is gonna be covered up, but little bits of it might peek through. All right, and now for the only time I'm going to use white in this painting. I've got my number 8 filbert, and I'm just going to get a little bit of white. I did wet my brush in my jar. So I'm just lightly sketching in a sun shape, and since my colors are still wet, it is picking that up. A little bit more white. I want to keep it a bit brighter right in the middle. I just wiped my brush off on a paper towel. I didn't clean it. And I'm gonna get just a little bit of yellow, not a ton. And I'm gonna dust around the edge here, just to break it up. I don't want a hard line on my sun. And I'm just lightly tapping at it in there to break up any brush marks. All right, so there's our completed background. I'm gonna let it dry, and again, it will take just a few extra minutes to dry. You could even get a hair dryer and dry the very back of the canvas if you needed to. Okay, so our canvas is dry now, and I'm gonna go to my 5/8 inch angle brush. You could use the 1/2 inch flat brush or 1/2 inch angle brush or any other brush that you're comfortable with. Now I put out some matte medium. I'm going to use quite a bit of matte medium here so that I can get this paint to be very, very transparent. Remember, you don't want to thin it down with water because then the paint will come off of the canvas later. And I'm going to use Diox purple, maybe a little bit of my cadmium orange, and I've got some phthalo green here. So I'm going to start by loading up with quite a bit of matte medium. I want a good amount because again, I want a very transparent color. I'm gonna grab just a little bit of my cadmium orange and mix it with my purple, just to kind of keep that same color going. I'm gonna go a little heavier on the purple side than I did before. Drag it out here so I can tell how transparent it is. That's not transparent enough, so more matte medium. That should be good right about there. So I'm gonna make some distant trees, and I'm just gonna I'm almost using like this corner of my angle brush and just kind of almost like scrubbing it on there just lightly. See how transparent that color is. I have a bit of a horizon right here, and I can put flat pressure there to lay down a bit more of that color. Don't put so much pressure on your brush here that you like really destroy that corner. I'm just using light pressure. These will just be like some distant bushes or something. And just dust that out a bit. And let's do the same thing over on this side. Now this color being so transparent is going to help it seem like the light from the setting sun is really glowing through some very distant trees and bushes. Don't worry about what the ground looks like here at all. We can even go just a little bit heavier on our paint mixture now. I still want it to be a bit transparent, but maybe just not as transparent as that first layer. I'm gonna lay down a good amount there and then just kind of break that up. I want it a little bit darker, a little heavier. There we go. And you can even come in with the tip of your angle brush and just kind of draw some little branches or grasses or whatever it's going to end up being. So I'm working really loose and quick, and that's not to make it look easy. Like I always hear, you make it look so easy. It's because I feel like the looser that I work with that there, the less likely I am to micromanage details. If I micromanage details, then it's gonna look really tight, and I don't want it to look tight. I want it to, you know, just seem really loose and distant. There's very little detail in these things that are way off in the distance. Save your detail work for the focal point of your painting. This isn't the focal point. It's just something that happens to be there. So if you put too much detail into it, too much time and attention into those details, then they're gonna seem closer and they'll seem out of place to everything else. Okay, I'm gonna go to my number 8 filbert, and I'm gonna get some more of my purple, a good amount. I'm not using matte medium right now. I might in a minute, but I'm gonna start out with just a little bit of water and some paint. So I've got my purple, and I think there's a bit of orange in there. And I'm gonna come into my phthalo green and just pull enough in so that this color gets really dark. The purple and the green together, it's gonna make kind of a, see if I spread it out, it's almost like a navy blue, but I'm gonna use it in a concentration that just kind of looks like a shadow to these colors. So I'm gonna create some bushes or something that's a little bit closer to us. So just kind of down here. Notice how I'm holding my brush, kind of holding it like that, and almost kind of tapping and scooting. Again, working really loose. And notice I kind of start flat, and then as I move it, see how I'm just kind of pushing it with my thumb, and it turns over onto the side. So see, I'm just kind of rolling it with my thumb a little bit as I go. And see, that almost gives the impression that we're using black. It looks very dark, so it's a nice shadow color, but it's not pure black. It's not gonna be just a dead black. I think that if you were to do this, you know, with this color on this side and maybe black on this side, you would see a huge difference. Just kind of nudging the color in where I want it to be. I'm not trying to fill in that whole area. I still want little bits of that light to shine through. Just kind of on the edge there, push it up. I think I will just use a little point of matte medium. Now this brush it's kind of getting old. I think I'm gonna have to replace him pretty soon. So if you're using like a brand new brush, you might not wanna do this with it, because kind of scooting it against the grain of the bristles, see how it's getting all deformed and I have bristles poking out? So reserve something like this for an older brush. Just get a little hint of that down into there. But never throw brushes away, guys. So if you have, you know, a brush like this and it's just not working out as a filbert anymore, you can't get the nice crisp lines with it, please don't throw it away. You can always do something with it. I've only thrown away one brush, and that was actually recently. And it was because I had never used Gorilla Glue before. So I didn't know how to use that. And the instructions said, brush it on. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll use a brush. And so I brushed it on and put the brush in the water to dry, or to, you know, so the glue didn't dry on it while I was doing something. But because I had never used Gorilla Glue before, I didn't realize that it actually sets in water. It sets much quickly in water than it does out of it. So I pulled it out of the water a few minutes later, and it was just a big, solid, foamy mess. So I threw that in the garbage. But it was an old, yucky brush that I never used for anything anyway. And I have tons of them, so I didn't feel too bad about it. Notice I didn't take this color all the way into the center here, just kind of at the edges. And I feel like that's a good start. I'm gonna get just a bit more of it. I mixed quite a bit of matte medium in with it this time. And I'm gonna start sideways, so I'm gonna hold my brush like this again. And I'm just gonna lightly put it against the canvas. See, I'm not crushing it. I'm not gonna brush side to side. I'm just gonna put it there and lightly drag it. The bulk of the pressure that I'm putting on my brush is really kind of on the ferrule. So I'm almost like setting the ferrule there against the canvas and just letting the bristles touch where they're going to touch. Let's throw a little orange in there just to get rid of some of that bluish color. I'm just looking for a very dark color, because that looked a little bluer than I wanted it to. See, it's almost like dry brushing, just gives us a little bit of texture. Helps us create this kind of rugged ground where there's a lot of wild, overgrown grasses. You can start defining, I want almost like a path or something here. And so this is where you can kind of start defining where that is, depending on where you put your brush strokes. So I have my sun over here, so I feel like I want to have the path kind of move this way, because if I have the path move from here to this way, that's going to contain the viewer right into here, and it's not going to be very interesting. Your eye is really going to start here, and if it just immediately shoots right off the canvas, there's nothing else to look at. But because I've got the path that kind of is going to come this way, I'm going to have a tree right here that's going to help bring it back up and around. But even if I keep my tree here, if my path comes this way, that's all you're going to see. It's going to be very uninteresting. So you want to be aware of things like that. I get asked about composition a lot, and I think that that's one of the main things that you should kind of have a little bit of a focus on when you're first starting to, you know, think about composition. What's going to draw the eye in? What's going to move it around? And where is the eye going to exit the canvas? And since that sun is so bright in the sky, I feel like that's really going to be the starting point for the viewer, because there's quite a bit of contrast there, especially next to the dark foliage on the ground. And so I have to be really careful that I don't shoot the viewer off into a blank corner from there. Give them something else to look at. So I'm just going to take this color, or a variation thereof. Sometimes it's a little more purple. Sometimes it's a little lighter, a little darker. Just take it all the way to the bottom of the canvas. All right, I'm gonna go to my number 6 round brush and I wet it in my jar a little bit. And I'm gonna go back to my purple orange mixture. Maybe just a little closer on the orange side than before. Little dot of water. And I'm gonna do a very similar thing to what we did here, only instead of holding my brush up and down like that, I'm gonna hold it this way and kind of flick upward just a little bit to start creating some texture of grasses. And you can go straight up like that. You can kind of arc it off to the side like that. You can kind of arc it off to the side that way. I'm going to do a little bit of both, kind of in a bunch of different directions. I'm not trying to get rid of that undercolor that I just did. It'll show through a little bit still. And I think every time I go back, my color might be a little bit different. I do want to keep in mind that I want it darker to the edges and get a little lighter as we come into the middle. I am using a bit of matte medium in there, just to keep my paint nice and smooth. And again, I'm taking it into the little trail or path that I have there, but I'm not going to take it all the way across. Just in a little bit farther than I took that darker color. So we've been doing this type of technique quite a bit lately. I'm really enjoying using the brush like that, very sideways. But I know that some people, I hear from some of you that you have a hard time doing that. And if you feel like you have a hard time doing this, you can do a couple of things. You can either practice it until you're more comfortable with it, or you can use another technique that you're comfortable with. Just because this is the technique that I'm using doesn't mean it's the only technique you can use. You know, we've done grasses and stuff in a lot of different videos. And so, you know, you can find one of the other videos where we've done grasses and use that technique if that's more comfortable for you. Let's go a little bit darker for those edges. I just pulled a little purple in there. If you feel like you need to add a bit of your green to get it even darker, that's perfectly fine. I'm going to bring just a hint of it in here to this lighter color. The more variation you have in your grasses, I think the more natural they're going to look. If they're very solid, you know, a single color, I think it's going to look much more, just a little more fake. And remember that the direction or where you place your shadows and highlights will really help with the direction of your ground. So to me, right here, the way we're doing this, with the dark up here, and then there's a little bit of a line that kind of comes down. So this looks up higher and it kind of swoops down a little. But also I think I'm going to make this quite bright right in here. And as it comes down this way, I'm going to get a little bit darker. And to me, that feels like it's going to say that this is slightly going up a hill. And just take a hint of that down into there. And see, I'm not worried about it covering all of the underpainting. I've still got some of the canvas texture with this color showing, and that's perfectly fine. That's why I put it there, so that if it happened to show, that it would look natural. And I kind of feel like this is taking on a look of, like, we have a beach here. I know you don't think of Utah beaches, but we have, you know, Antelope Island, and there's a beach on Antelope Island where it's very, very sandy. It's the kind of sand that makes it really hard to walk in. It's such loose, fine sand. But there are grasses that grow in parts of it, and it kind of looks like that, where you can see that loose sand, but then there's grasses as well. So that's kind of what it's reminding me of. Just again with some of that darker color, I am taking care not to cover all of that greenish color. Okay, I'm not going to clean off my brush. I still have my purple orange. I'm going to go into a little bit more orange, a little more matte medium. And the matte medium on this part is optional. You could be using water if you like. Let's get some of that in here, in our path. I'm using very short brush strokes. So can you see what it is I'm doing here? My brush is going flat, but it's very light pressure. I'm not putting a ton of pressure on my brush. And then it's just kind of a light flick upward. See? That's it. Just very short brush strokes. As the paint starts to wear off, I just kind of turn it a little bit. If you use a ton of paint on your brush when you're doing this, you're going to get more like globs rather than, you know, thin, sparse little grasses. So just be aware of that. See, I'm mixing my paint and then I'm kind of tapping it and rolling it, which gets off some of the paint back onto my palette. And then I use light pressure because I still have enough paint on here that if I put a good amount of pressure on it, I'm going to leave a good amount of paint, and that doesn't look like grass. So, you know, I am still using just light pressure to start. Let's grab a little spot of yellow for this farthest back area that's closest to the sun. I don't want solid yellow, so I'm still adding it to that purple-orange mixture. And very short little brush strokes. I can come up over top of the sun just a little bit if you like. A little more yellow. I just want to pop a couple of highlights right here in this center grass. But you don't want to take it too far into the dark area, because then your shadows and your highlights are going to be conflicting with each other. And pull a bit of purple in. Because like I said, I want it to seem like it's kind of moving down a hill. And right now I don't feel like I have that. So I'm going to go a little bit darker here. Let's throw a bit of that green in with the purple and get some nice dark areas. I'm going to use a little bit more paint than I have been in the other areas so I can really fill in the shadows. A little point of orange just to Kind of help get rid of that blue. There we go. You could even use a fan brush here if you like. If this is a technique, this sideways technique, that gives you trouble, use a fan brush if you like. In fact, I think I might. I just wet my fan brush in the water, and let's see, I'm gonna start in my darker areas. And really, I want some nice long growth in those darker areas. So I'm gonna get some purple, and I'm just gonna kind of twirl it on in there. And some green, and again, just kind of twirling it in there, getting a good load on the brush. Little extra drip of water. Now, for a fan brush, if you hold it flat like this and just lightly streak it up, you get really weird, really rigid looking lines. And I hope you can see this with the dark on dark. So what I'm gonna do is I'm really gonna use a corner at a time. So from about here to there. And then I'll use from about there to there. If I do use it on the center, I'm gonna press pretty flat so that it pretty much goes flat. So, see, I'm just using the kind of that corner and flicking. So I'm not like drawing a line like that. I'm almost like flicking. I'm kind of rolling it with my finger a bit. There we go. That is about what I was looking for. Roll over, because see the paint is about gone there, but I've still got quite a bit of paint on that corner. I can do the same thing. Let's do the same thing on the other side. Kind of pull it toward the path a bit. Because again, in our composition, that's going to help draw our eye there. If our grasses move off to the side, our eye is going to move off to the side. So I'm kind of brushing up, and it's moving slightly toward the path. And it's very subtle. I'm not getting, a huge amount. See, I keep going over that spot and I'm just getting little tiny bits at a time. Let's throw a bit of orange in there. Not a ton. Really get a nice muddy color. Sometimes mud is exactly the color that I'm looking for. There we go. Don't be afraid to take it up and over those distant trees and shrubs that we made. I don't really want to take it over my path. Not yet, anyway. I don't know. We'll see. I may change my mind. So I'm mixing my color really loosely. I'm not going for specific colors. Okay, I'm pretty happy with my grass for now. Once I have the trees, I may come back and touch it up a little around the base of them. So I'm gonna use my 5/8 inch. Again, you could use a 1/2 inch or whatever you're comfortable with making trees. And I'm gonna get some of my Diox purple and some of my green. This is going to be the underpainting color for the trees. So I'm just going to decide where to start. I know I want it over here, and I'm just going to make short, almost clipped little brush strokes, because that's going to help me get a little bit of character into my tree. And let's say it's got a little root right there. Same thing on this side. Don't try to make your tree be anything. You know, don't try and tell it, this is what you're gonna look like. Just kind of suggest to it where it's gonna go and let it decide from there. You know, if your brush stroke gets out of control in a spot, don't worry about it, don't try and clean it off, just leave it and you can make a little, you know, maybe a little branch off of it. And it's possible that once we get the leaves on there that you won't even see anything like that. So I wouldn't worry about it. Let it do what it wants to do. And let's do another one, maybe a little bit smaller, over on this side. Okay, I think that's a good start for now on the shape of our trees. And I will obviously be adding more branches later, but I'm gonna go ahead and highlight the trunks now. Now I'm gonna start with the one on the left, and the reason I decided to start with the one on the left is because since I'm right-handed and I want the highlight on the inside part of the tree, so each tree is gonna be highlighted in the area that faces the sun. I know that being right-handed, I'm gonna have a much easier time doing that on the other tree. But on this one, it's gonna be a little bit trickier for me. Sometimes I've noticed that, you know, when we make a painting, if we do the same thing on the left as on the right, one side always looks better than the other. I know that the left side is the side I'm gonna struggle to make look as good. So if I start with that side, then I feel like I have an easier time with it, and maybe that's just me. I'm gonna get a little bit of my purple orange mixture, just slightly on the orange side so you can see that brown in there. It's pretty close to probably this color up here, the darker part of the sky. Now I'm gonna use my brush flat like we did on the grasses, and I'm just gonna kind of start streaking it down, keeping in mind that I want it to be brighter on this side and darker on this side. This first layer is going to look awful, so I don't want you to freak out if your first layer looks awful or weird or any of that. It's going to start looking better and better as we get the layers on there. Now when I'm painting like this, especially tree bark, I really could get lost in doing this and, you know, paint the tree bark forever and ever and ever. But I'm going to try really hard not to do that. For you guys, I'm gonna try and just do a couple of layers. Don't fill in everything, leave some dark areas. That's gonna make it really interesting. Hopefully you can see that. See how here I've got the root shape, but I took a little bit of the highlight along that top edge there, and I took more right here. So now it looks like there's two roots there, and there's a dark recessed area. And you get to decide where those are. So whenever we do things like that, I get a lot of questions. How do I know where to put the highlights? You put them exactly where you want them. That's where the highlights go. Nowhere else. Only where you want them. And if you get a highlight in a place that you don't like, so what? Leave it there. Come back and take care of it later. I'm using super light pressure. I'm pretty much dry brushing. All right, don't adjust your eyes. I flipped my canvas upside down. And that's because since I want this side highlighted and this side darker, I know I'm gonna put the paint on the end of my brush. So that way, I can get at it that way and kick the highlight right where I need it. So never be afraid to flip your canvas upside down. I even think that painting trees sometimes completely on an upside down canvas is a really interesting thing to do and can help you get some unique shapes to your trees. I'm just going to do the highlights. Okay, once you have that first layer, and I'm just barely taking it up into the branches, I'm not gonna worry about highlighting all of the branches perfectly. I'm just gonna give a suggestion of it on some parts. Once you're done with that, if you have any hard areas where your highlight stops and then your dark side begins, just go ahead and pick up, I'm just picking up purple, not the purple and green, and I'm just gonna lightly go over that transition line there, just very gently. And I can introduce dark spots back if I decided that, you know, maybe this area is a little too flat and I want something interesting in there, a little dark recessed area. I can just come in and just kind of, with the tip of my filbert, just kind of scrub that in a bit. Keep a little shadow spot. Same thing here on the roots. Let's go with even more orange. So I didn't clean off my brush, obviously. I just mixed it in with some more orange. That's quite a bit brighter than the last color we used. Keep in mind what's facing the sun, what's the closest to it. And just light pressure. The texture of the canvas is helping us get kind of a bark texture. I got a little bit too much of that light color right there in the back, but that's okay. I'm not going to fight with it right now because it'll just make it worse. I'm just going to leave it. I think another fun thing about painting upside down like this is you really can't judge your painting. You don't know what it looks like yet. So don't look at it and say, oh, that highlight looks terrible. Because you never know. When we flip it back upright, you may think, oh man, that's perfect. So don't worry about it. Just get it on where you think it should go. We'll flip it upside right here in just a few minutes, and then we'll be able to see what's going on. I'm just adding little bits of slightly lighter, the orange. I'm not using any of the yellow. I'll probably use a little bit of yellow in a bit, but right now I'm not worried about the yellow. And just get rid of some of that I thought was a little light. Get some of that dark back in there. There we go, much better. And I can even pull out the shape of my tree a bit. It's just a little narrow there at the bottom for me. So I just took that purple-green mixture. Just pull that shape out a bit. Much better. Cleaned off my brush, a little purple orange again. I'm just really going to keep doing the same thing on here, going back and forth with some lighter and some darker color, pretty much just variations of the purple orange mixture. And then in just a minute we'll flip it upside right. But I think until then I'm just going to put you in time lapse because I think you have a pretty good idea of what I'm doing. Okay, I've flipped my canvas back upside right, and I think I'm pretty happy with the highlights on that tree. So I'm gonna go ahead and do the highlights on the smaller tree. Now on this smaller tree, I don't need to flip it upside down because I can get the angle appropriately, but if you want to, you absolutely can do that. And I'm really gonna do the exact same thing on this tree, just kind of reshape it a bit with my purple green and then go back and forth with the orange purple mixture for the highlights and the shadows. So in order to not bore you to death, I'm going to put you in time lapse. And so notice I started seeing kind of a dark spot in my tree there. So I went with it and took the bright orange around it. And now I have a little knot in my tree. So be aware of things like that happening. You can have your tree suggest something to you and go with it. This tree bark, you guys, is all about brush pressure. All about brush pressure and how much paint you're using. And just picking up little tiny points of paint. Just little tiny bits. And then I'm really just touching the paint to the canvas. I'm not putting so much pressure that my brush is on the canvas and bending. It's really just the paint that I just picked up. See, you can't even really see my brush moving. Let me get you in here nice and close. Can you see how much paint is on there? There's not a, I mean, there's a lot, but the orange is what I'm using, and there's not a lot. So I'm gonna come in here and just kind of pop a highlight right there. It's a little darker than I want it right there. See, my brush isn't really moving, and see that tiny bit of paint that's coming off? See how barely I'm even just moving my brush. But that little tiny bit of paint that's coming off is enough to do exactly what I want. And notice I have my hand on my canvas. That's how I'm able to steady myself for that. So again, just a little bit, and let's kind of pop right here. This is definitely a way of painting that takes a little bit of patience. You know, don't feel like you have to slap down a layer all in one go. Build it. Take it away if you need to. Add it back in later if you want to. I decided I need just a hint of a shadow right here above the knot. So I just got some more of my purple orange. And same thing, barely touching. And if I decide I don't like that, it's okay. I can take it away. I can get just a little bit more orange. And put it right back. So don't be afraid to experiment. I know that you're watching these videos and you're making a painting, you know, to have fun and, you know, feel a sense of accomplishment, and that's awesome. But I think you're gonna get the most sense of accomplishment in being patient and trying techniques and really figuring out how to make those techniques work for you, rather than trying to do this video start to finish in one shot and get a perfect painting. Okay, I think I'm pretty happy with the highlights on the tree trunks. I may mess with them a little bit more later, especially this one on the left. I feel like it has some good textures going on in here, and I kind of missed out on some of that here. So I might mess with that later, but I'm gonna go ahead and do the foliage on the trees first. Okay, so for the foliage on my trees, I'm gonna take a clean, dry paper towel, and I'm gonna crunch it up into a ball, really tight. Get a lot of wrinkles in the paper towel. I'm gonna unwrap it, maybe crumple it up a few more times. I want some nice crinkly texture. And then I'm just gonna kind of ball it so I've got a little spot. I'm not keeping it crunched up real tight, but crunching it up like that. See all these little wrinkles that I have in there now? Those are gonna help me get some nice leaves. So I'm gonna start with my purple green mixture. I'm gonna get some of my purple, take it over here, mix it in with my green a bit, and just kind of tap it so I don't have big gobs of paint. Now, the important thing here is you don't want to push real hard. I'd rather have you go over a spot a few times than push really hard and get a big black chunk. So what we're not going to do is put full pressure like that on the paper towel. Instead, we're going to come in really lightly and just touch like that. And every time we touch, just kind of turn your paper towel in a different direction. And then we'll get some nice broken looks like that. So just start somewhere. I'm just going to start right here. And lighter pressure as I work out. And right now it looks strange because I just have the couple of branches. But once I get in at least this first layer of foliage, then I can come back and add some smaller detail branches. Take it all the way to the top. If you don't take it all the way to the top, your tree's gonna look really scrunched. So there, I want it heavier, so I'm just going over it a couple of times. Don't keep it confined onto each little branch. And I'm going to keep it really light and airy. But if you wanted a heavier, a heavier amount of foliage, maybe you're doing a summer painting, then you could use a heavier amount of paint and just kind of blot at it a bit more. Another thing you don't want to do here is don't do that, because see, then you're going to get this weird spiral. So when I say I'm turning my paper towel each time, I mean I'm going to go dot, and then turn my hand, and dot, and then turn my hand. Not a spiral like that. If your paper towel starts to get too flat and you're getting too much of a blob of your color, then just crumple it up and find a different spot. I think right now I'm fine. Super light pressure as I get toward the edge. I'm even going to take a little bit over my trunk there. And I did find a new spot on my paper towel. Let's do the same thing on this smaller tree on the right. Up off the top. Oh, I'm getting a little line there from something in my paper towel, so I'm just going to change its shape just a little bit. All right, now we can add some little detail branches. So I'm going to go to my long liner and I'm going to get my green purple mixture. A little extra water just so it flows a bit better. And don't spend too much time here and get real specific and get in here all tight like that, because we have foliage in here and so it's kind of hiding some things. So notice how far back I'm holding my brush. I'm just going to kind of start somewhere and just, you can put a little bit more pressure on it there if you like. You can even just kind of start somewhere random. You're just giving the idea that those branches are there. You don't have to see real specific start and stop points. Just right in here in this little clump that kind of seems to be out on its own. I'm just giving some little jagged bits in there to say there's a branch in there. My paints are getting a little bit dry, so I'm having to add a bit more water. There we go. Okay, I'm going to take my paper towel and I just got a clean spot on it. Again, making sure that it's nice and rumpled there on the on the face. And I'm gonna get some of my purple and mix it with some of my orange. Get that purple-orange mixture. Again, I want it to lean just a little closer on the orange side, but I don't want it to be terribly bright orange. Now I'm gonna concentrate this color toward the bottom edge of the foliage. Very light pressure. And if that's not showing up enough, I'm just gonna grab a little bit more orange. Very light pressure. This is just gonna kind of look like some of that light is reflecting on some of these leaves. You can take it down off of the edge. You don't have to keep it confined to where you put that first dark color. But I'm not going to take it up much higher than that. I might take some of this slightly darker version and just put little points of it up in here. But I'm going to keep the bottom edge pretty bright. There we go. Yeah, that's what I was looking for right there. Let's do the same thing on our larger tree. So a little purple-orange mixture, kind of reshape my paper towel a little bit. And it's okay if that first color is still wet and I'm picking a bit of it up. That doesn't matter. Barely touching, barely touching. And I'm not putting it flat. I'm really only just touching it right here on that edge of the paper towel. A little bit of a brighter orange. And again, still just kind of touching the edge. I feel like I need just a bit of that purple orange right in here. Well, maybe just a little bit of orange. That purple orange isn't showing up so well. I'm gonna get a clean spot on my paper towel. And I put out a little bit more yellow and orange. So I'm gonna get a bit of orange, not a ton. I don't want a ton of this one. A bit of my yellow. Kind of tap them together and right toward the edge. And Mr. Moon just woke up. Just gonna put a hint of that. And if it's too much, you can come back with a little bit of a darker color. Like right there, I got that yellow line. So I just got a little extra orange and just tap over it in one direction and it kind of breaks it up. Just hints of that yellow. That's about all the yellow I'm gonna do. I'm gonna work on this trunk for just a minute, just adding in a little bit more texture in my shadows and highlights. And then we're gonna do one more thing to the trees and I think we're done with them. Okay, I'm gonna let that left tree dry for a minute, let's just pop the highlights on this tree trunk real quick while that dries. So I'm gonna get some yellow. I washed off my brush. I'm gonna pick up orange, and I'm gonna get just a pinpoint of yellow and mix it in there. I don't want bright yellow in my trunk, but I just mixed a tiny bit of it in with my orange. And I'm gonna be very selective about where I put this, just on the parts that I really want to stand out. So like around the knot here. Maybe just a little bit up in here. And remember again, if you don't like these brighter highlights, that's fine, just keep going with it. You can kick them back later with some of your darker colors. Let's do the same thing on this tree, and then I think we're done with the trees. Having to do a little bit of art yoga here to avoid having to flip my canvas upside down again. Okay, a couple things left to do and we're done. I'm gonna go back to my fan brush. I'm just picking up a little bit of purple. Not a ton, just because I don't want my yellow and orange to be terribly bright. I'm gonna do a mixture of all three of them. See, just kind of a light color that's fairly similar to the underpainting we did here. Maybe just a little bit lighter than that. A little bit of water. And let's just pop a couple of grasses up. Very short. Just kind of right there. See, again, my brush, it's not touching all the way. It's just a couple of hairs on that corner. See, just a little bit. Just give a couple of bright grasses here. Maybe we'll take it out into this area since it's quite a bit lighter. See, I'm almost making little circles. I'm almost doing like this with my brush. That's kind of the brush stroke. Just very, very short. The bristles on my brush are not like bending. It's just kind of catching. Let's just do a couple over here. Not too many. That was kind of an odd angle for me. Let's try it over here. That's better. See how the fan brush kind of makes like a flat line at the bottom of that? I think that's really helpful because it makes it look like grasses that's grown up out of the ground. And then if you have any hard lines of a lighter color like that that you don't like, it's all right. I'm just going to grab a bit more of my purple, mix it in there. Darken that color up a bit. Even more than that. There we go. That should be good. Much better. And it just kind of hides it. Bring a couple over the base of our trees. And I think I do want to go just a hint lighter. So I'm just getting some yellow and some orange, kind of in that same area, but it's mostly just the yellow and orange. And just right in the path. Just a few to kind of pop the grasses there. I know the fan brush is intimidating and some of you really don't like using it, so please don't use it if you don't want to. You can do grasses a million ways. Let's even just take some of those up a bit. There we go. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. I think I'm going to sign it. I'm going to use what's left of my yellow here. And there's your sunset painting. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope it wasn't too scary for you mixing together a bunch of colors that you wouldn't usually mix together. If you enjoyed this painting, please make sure that you subscribe and maybe share it with someone who you think would like it as well. Also, don't forget to check out the video description below for links to where you can find me all over the internet, including Facebook and Instagram, so you can share your painting with me. Thank you as always for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.